Hello there. Hope you are doing well. I wanted to make a short video here on how I put this ambient system that you are currently listening to. The concept behind this system is a torus shape that is around the listener, and as I move around, the torus shape is going to be adding and removing different AK events to an array that are then playing within the torus. Now, the reason why I wanted to do it this way was I wanted these ambient one-shots to always sound like they are part of the ambient bed, and never close enough to the point where I would have expected to maybe see them if they sounded so close. This is something that I thought would be great for things like birds, maybe distant creatures, even random like walla one-shots that are far off from the crowd, for example. And also, just to make it a bit more dynamic, as I walk and move around, different events are going to be added and removed to this array based off of actors that collide in with the collision sphere that drives this whole thing. So, yeah, I hope this will be cool, somewhat inspiring, maybe, and this is how I put it together. So, diving into the blueprint for the system. So starting from chronological order in the construction script, all that I'm really doing here is I'm setting the sphere radius based off of the size of the torus, and then I'm setting two variables that I'll be using later, and these won't be changing. Now, the reason why I have a sphere collider is if I look at the viewport, I don't want any actors within the whole of the torus to suddenly exclude elements that were previously in the array. So I'm using the sphere collider to add and remove events to the array, and the torus is a reference point for where the events will actually spawn from. I just have this little divide happening here because the torus shape in my case was a little funky, and I had to divide the radius by 2.5 to make the sphere fit perfectly. From there in the event graph, I am doing a little initialization and just making sure that the player exists because this all relies on their location. And then I'm starting my timers. Now I have two timers here, and the first one is responsible for updating the location of the torus. I have this as a public variable, so if I want to change how frequently it's updating its location based off maybe player velocity or something, I can do that. And the second timer is responsible for controlling how often an AK event is going to be playing within the torus. Within this function here, I'm just running a little check to see how large the array is, and if it's longer than 3 items in my case. I'll show in a moment where this is coming from. But if it's larger than 3 items, then I just want to change what the minimum spawn rate is. The reason why I'm doing this, it felt like when there were less than 3 items that having a faster spawn rate felt a little unnatural. And vice versa, when there were more than 3 items within the array, I want it to feel a little more lively, like there were more animals within this area and they're all communicating with each other. So which is why I am changing the minimum start time based off of the number of items. I'm going to get to the main logic in a moment since that's the end. But the next important bits are the collision overlap events. The main concept that's happening here is I am adding and removing events to an array based off of the tags found on the collided actors, which is happening in this logic over here. Within this function, first thing I'm doing is I'm checking if the actor has any tags. And if so, I want to check if the tag at index 1 is correspondent with this master map that has all the possible AK events and keys. And the reason why I'm looking at index 1 is, in my case here, I'm using index 0 to specify if it's going to be a dynamic or static event, which I'm going to get to in a moment. And index 1 is going to be the correspondent tag that's going to go with an AK event. From there, I'm setting what the index AK event is, and then I'm checking if a static or a dynamic tag was found on the actor. And if not, then it's going to print a little debug saying, hey, there's no tag assigned here. And from there, I'm just going to be passing along if the dynamic key was equal to what it should be. From there, I'm using that bool to either add an event to an array, that is the array of events that are currently potentially going to play, or if it's static, it's going to spawn a point source emitter at that location, which is this logic over here. I have this entire section, something I can enable and disable, just in case if I want to use it or not. All I'm doing is I'm just spawning this actor that I have that contains some additional logic, but this is just an emitter with a few extra functions, like play if I'm within the attenuation radius, for example, or if I want it to play one shots or play within random location. It's something I can configure from here. And then same idea for the overlap end events. It's either going to remove an element from the indexed array, or it's going to destroy the static emitter that was created. So from there is the main logic that controls the playback for the emitter within the torus. From the timer, I'm using this function that I showed earlier, where I'm just grabbing a random event from the array, and I'm checking if the array is empty or not, and I'm also getting how long the array is. If it has a value, then I'm doing another check and just seeing how many elements are in it. And if it's over that minimum amount, then I want to shuffle the indexes just for a little extra randomization. And from there, I have a function that is going to be setting the random location within the torus that the emitter is going to spawn in. The function is first breaking that vector of the boundaries of the torus, which came from the construction script. And I'm setting the x, y, and z variables. And for the x and y axis, I have a range limit variable, which is to change the potential range of the x and y axis. So instead of the x axis, for example, being 0 to 1,000, it's going to be 500 to 1,000, just to account for that hole that's in the center of the torus. So it's going to float between that range limited value and the maximum length of the axis, and then I'm multiplying by -1 to get all the negative values, and then I'm doing a random bool to pick if it's going to be positive or negative. Same thing happening for the y-axis, and the z-axis is just positive and negative. From there, I'm returning what that vector result is, and saving that as a variable to reuse. From there, I have another function that's just taking whatever the triggered AK event is and comparing the vector result and just making sure that the AK event isn't gonna spawn outside of whatever the maximum attenuation radius is, just as a way of saving potential voices that you are never gonna hear. So that's what this is handling. And the next function that I have, so in this function, I am just checking if the vector result is within an important actor that I really don't want to make sure that the AK event is spawning within. From here, I can choose the actor that I want to check for specifically, or if I want it to be for everything. This would be useful if, say, for example, there are a lot of birds within the array that are currently playing. And if I walk up to a building, I don't want the birds to spawn within the building itself. So I'm just checking and making sure, like, hey, is this spawn location inside of another actor? That's important. And then this can, of course, be configurable to whatever my needs are. So assuming that the location is not within an actor, it's going to post an event at that location using the triggered AK event that we set earlier, and then also the vector result. And after that, we are posting a debug. Now, if this debug is active, it's going to draw a sphere at the location of the emitter so I can visually see it. And then also going to be printing to the screen the name of the current playing AK events. Now, to show this in action, see, that was the spot an event just spawned. So I hope this was at all useful, helpful, inspiring maybe. If there are any suggestions that anyone had, I would love to hear how I can further improve the system. But anyways, thank you so much for sticking around and watching, and bye for now. Cheers.